Thank you very much. All right, we're going to move this along because there are a lot of speakers. So just so everybody does know exactly the site, it's immediately north of the Williamsburg Bridge on the Brooklyn side, of course. The center of it was landmarked by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission a number of years ago. The rest of the site, which Mike and his team are developing, is not landmarked. There are many other buildings on this industrial complex. They were either too late in the era to be landmarked or too changed and altered over time. So the commission only landmarked the central building, which you'll see in a minute is really 3 buildings. A number of years ago, I think you're going to see a lot of these images, so I'll go quickly. Maybe this would be in the 60s. The factory was still up and operating quite fully, and this great picture shows something that was not landmarked, which is the sign. Today, the building is a vestige, let's say, of its former glory. This is a shot, obviously, from the East River, showing the historic core, the part that is landmarked, with the power plant in front of that, if you can see that, and then over to the right where the sign is, a part of the complex added much later, and it and the sign itself, as I said, were not landmarked. Again, a few shots from the air. So you've already seen a few images. I'll show you a few others. This is a shot, again, from a photograph from 1905 from the river. And here you see a really different looking building. It has 2 turrets on the end. It has other crenellations along the top of the building, which are no longer there. And it has a much shorter smokestack. So the building has endured many changes over time. Another shot here from the Brooklyn Eagle, maybe from around 1910, it says, showing the whole complex crowded in with many other buildings and kind of in its heyday of operation. As was mentioned, it was built by the Havemeyer and Elder company and was the largest silver sugar factory, let's call it, in the world when it was fully operational. Now, this shows the beginning of an approach to how we secured landmark approval to add something to the top of the building. A storyline is always kind of what you need to make a credible case to the Landmarks Commission, and the storyline for this came from the history of the building, and as you can see in the red was what was there and what had been lost. We sort of call this the lobotomy of the building, jokingly. And it's an extraordinarily robust building. For those of you who don't know it, even an intimidating building. It rises right from the street front on Kent Avenue. This is the non-waterfront side. It rises straight up with this robust brick and deep window recess, small windows relatively. This slide shows how over the years when you needed to put a piece of new equipment into the building, well, you just crunched a hole in the side of the building and did it, and you didn't really worry about repairing it because it was an industrial building. Why did we need to spend all that money to repair? So you see several places where crunches in the side of the building occurred, and then were just kind of left open. You also see some conveyor additions that were added later and took the sugar over into the storage building, which was next door. This became part of the story as well for getting landmark approval for redevelopment. This shows you, again, this extraordinarily robust brick style with crenellations at the top, deep recesses. It was called the Rund Bogenstiel style of architecture, developed in Germany, and then naturally brought by the many German industrialists, 19th century industrialists, to Brooklyn generally, but to the waterfront in particular, and most beautifully, I think, and most famously in this building. Many of the breweries that used to, along with the churches of Brooklyn, interesting pairing of breweries and churches, which so defined 19th century Brooklyn. Many of those breweries were owned and operated by Germans who used a similar style of architecture. So this is what we see, and wonderfully on the bottom part of the top part of the lower part of the smokestack, you can still see the Havemeyer and Elder ghost of the sign, and part of that will be retained and restored in the upcoming preservation and adaptive reuse. But you get a sense from this slide, I think, of the extraordinary brickwork. This shows you on top of the original, that rounded part of the extension of the smokestack. So this was all added. You also begin to get a sense of the views peeking out from on top, and why a developer might think that that would be a nice thing to, and an asset to incorporate into some housing. Now this shows an extraordinary, kind of a wonderful little diagram, I think. I won't go into it in great detail, but it shows you the process of refining sugar and how it worked actually at this plant. Stuff came off the boat and was unloaded into a wash house, further down the press filter house, and then finally into the char filter house, the pan house, and the finishing house. Those three processes on the far right are what make up the three parts of the building that are landmarked. But it was quite an extraordinary process that Carol has also alluded to. This is a little section of the building showing essentially that it's not a building. This is really not a building. It's more of an industrial complex that houses extraordinary machinery unique to this industrial process. And I think Bob Silman is going to show some other photographs of the interior, but it's one of the great experiences these days to go and see the interior of this so-called building. It's filled with these kinds of, this kind of equipment that means that in many cases there are no floors. So we're not talking about a building like Robert Gare built with C.A.P. Turner, for instance, in Dumbo. We're not talking about that kind of a building, a warehouse with huge floor loads. We're talking about really a container of equipment. And we prepared these little diagrams really to illustrate what this is, what we really have once all that equipment is taken out. And of course, we're hoping that some of it can be saved as sculpture and used somewhere on the site. But there's an awful lot of it to think that it all can be used that way, so it'll have to be selectively used. But what this shows is those three buildings combined into one piece of architecture, you might say. The street side, the Kent Street side on the left, and the water side toward the East River on the right. So our job is not only as preservation architects to preserve the exterior and all those elements that were designated in the landmarks by the Landmarks Commission, but also to figure out how it can be adaptively reused. You know, almost any building can be adaptively reused, and we know that story, and it's been a great story for the rebirth of American cities and for the saving of many historic buildings whose original use has disappeared. So this building was either going to be lost or it would be adaptively reused. And luckily, with some work, this is not the most easy adaptively reused building we've ever worked on. But you can see our strategy right here in this little model that we prepared, which shows that we thought maybe the deep depths within this building didn't lend itself to light and air for habitation by apartments. So we needed to carve out a hole, let's say, in the building. Hardly a hole because the floors weren't even always there, but to create a core around which we could get more light and air, and so the depths from an interior space to an outside wall was something that could be worked into reasonable layouts for residential living. And that volume of space, then, we were showing we should be able to reuse it on the top of the building, creating the same volume that we had before. So this is now a view of that little model and an idea, nice idea, but we had to sell it to Landmarks Commission. By the way, I should fess up if you don't know. I am a current Landmarks Commissioner, but I wasn't then. And in fact, this was the last project that I could take before the commission as a civilian, so to speak. So I'm recused from all of activity that my firm has that comes before the Landmarks Commission now. I didn't realize to what extent that would separate me from a core of architecture which I love, but I now operate on the other side. So the question now is how to design that top part, because the commission was under no compunction to allow that to be there. So this is what we wanted to do and ultimately did get permission to do. This is just a section showing on top the new additional floors, that setback. It shows the courtyard. All of that yellow is residential. In the midsection, you see a community facility, and in the lower level, retail. So that's kind of the general plan. And here you see with that courtyard in place how we could actually, in two cores, elevator, stair, new cores, we could actually develop a reasonable and rational approach to the layout of residential spaces. So then we took the hard part. How do you do that? What is the story? Well, these are just some sketches along the way. We probably had 30 or 40 or 50 of these kinds of sketches and stories. Well, this wasn't the story. Landmarks didn't think this made much sense, and I think we were not too in love with it ourselves, trying to make the bottom of the building tell us how to add to the top. And then we looked at something like this, lots of these little sketches, lots and lots and lots of these little sketches. You know, do you add to the top by separating visually from the base? We thought that that was the right approach. In other words, you don't use brick up there for sure. Then we started looking more closely at the Tate Museum, where lots of people look at the Tate Museum when they want to add some very visible top to a large industrial building, and this was sort of our approach to that. Landmarks Commission was not too enamored of this approach either. Here we were struggling away, looking at all sorts of different ways of separating this new from the historic base. And by the way, you should see that sign. That sign, we didn't have it initially, but even though it was not landmark, we began to incorporate it, and I think we were starting to gather a little more favor with the Landmarks Commission at this point. So this was the scheme that was ultimately approved. You see the sign is there. We took a much more industrial approach to the the whole idea, the storyline. We looked at all the older and not so old industrial buildings that were on the site. Steel, iron, glass was all incorporated in that. So we started to develop a new kind of a stew of our own making and put it up there, put the sign in a way that would dominate the whole complex, and got landmark approval. I think we got unanimous. Maybe I had one vote against it. I can't quite remember. This is from the side. This is from the rear. And I want to show you those funny things that are sticking out on the left in a minute. This is how the whole affair, the refinery building itself, sits into the larger complex of new housing that'll surround the building. The centerpiece building, of course, you've seen this. And then just finally, a very, very complete program of restoration for the exterior, including all this brickwork, new windows to match the old, opening up on the ground level these great round arch style, that's Rundbogenstile, round arch style, opening up these spaces to interior retail spaces. And finally, these crazy things on the outside of the building was our response to the Landmarks Commission's desire to have some of this history of the building live on, this violent history of the building live on, and the recollection now of these angles where it was as if the conveyors were literally cut off, and then we've adapted them to become terraces. So I think that's my part.